begin with you, Mr. van der Broek. Did you go to the polls?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Oh, okay. And do you want to tell us why do you think there is such a competition between two extremely different finalists in this competition?
Well, the interesting thing is that the two parties that are leading in the polls are not that far apart ideologically. They are both on the right, both in terms of socio-economic policies. There are differences, but they're not so large. And in terms of socio-cultural issues, certainly when we speak about European integration, there's a big difference between the two parties, but both are quite firm on migration and integration of migrants. But of course, the party of Geert Wilders is much more radical and more extreme on those issues than the VVD. But certainly the VVD is not at the polar opposite of Geert Wilders.
Right. Well, none of us
voters are actually.
None of us, in fact, outside your country is that familiar with all the political parties that are existing in your country. But what people are interested in, why is this election so important to all of us in the rest of the world? If there is a far-right candidate who claims to have attracted the eyeballs, but according to Mr. van der Broek, he's certainly not going to be a pillar of the future government in the Netherlands because nobody wants to have a coalition with him or his party. So why it matters?
Yeah, I think that firstly we need to understand that now here is an election in the Netherlands because as we know, the Netherlands is one of the co-member of the European Union and also one of the father of the European Union. So we understand how
one of the 15.
Yes, yes. How it is important that we look at what happened in the co-part of the European Union, especially this Freedom Party and its leaders have so distincted, state commitment to be against the European integration and other. And of course, I think the more important thing is more people regarded this elections in the Netherlands as a rehearsal of these elections in France or maybe in Germany.
But then, is that the right logic? That's what many people also wondered. I mean, if you have a black swan in the United States, let's say Mr. Trump eventually becomes the US president, would that mean that the extreme candidates would all have an upper hand? Is the media giving them an extra hour, extra attention, and therefore really have a negative impact, or rather have an impact than it should be on the eventual election result?
Yes. Yes. So I think now the question or the problem now, not only for us and also especially for European politicians, especially those elite, is it's difficult to understand what will happen. So which means uncertainty since Brexit, since election of Mr. Trump in the United States. So I think now people are talking about maybe the change of weather. Maybe not only a single election will happen, will change something in the Netherlands, but maybe it would be a part of the whole of uncertainties in the Western countries.
Mr. van der Broek, let me ask you about this. From the Dutch perspective, what do you make of the rise of this Mr. Wilders? Are you also as voters giving him extra attention because of his extreme remarks? The rise of the far right, is it a natural trend or is it a man-made phenomenon?
Well, certainly these parties have been getting more attention than you would expect on the basis of their size. So there tends to be a tendency among media, among journalists, to pay more attention to these parties than they would get if they were less radical or less extreme.
When we are talking about the Netherlands and the Dutch election, is it really relevant to the extent that people are talking about so-called black swan? Why are we focusing on a fake trend, or are we really looking at the real issues here?
Well, in the Netherlands, the point is more that we have so many parties, and none of them is really large. So any kind of coalition is really difficult to form, and the fact that that there are some parties, or there's at least one party that's of intermediate size that is excluded by all other parties, makes it even more difficult. So it's difficult in the Netherlands right now to form any kind of government.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll go in the same way as many Scandinavian countries, where we will have a minority government. And that works in Scandinavian countries. And we may see something like that in the Netherlands as well.
I see. Mr. Cui, two things. One is the attitude toward the immigrants. The other is what to do with the Quran. Of course, Mr. Wilders have a lot of different words compared to his other counterparts during the election. Does that really reflect the average attitude of the Dutch population?
It would not be the attitude of most Dutch people, but certainly I think it represents some viewpoints from people, local people. Because as we know, since the the refugee or immigration issue raised in Europe, indeed the Netherlands, especially the people or society, they also join into this kind of debate across Europe, and especially how, if we look at this maybe the trend in some the policy in some European countries, and also maybe the more concerned by Dutch people is how about the security issue related to the refugee or migration, especially as we know that recent days there is a a debate between Turkey and Dutch, which give I think more support to Wilders and his party,
well,
because this shows a kind of internal tension between the Turkey people who live in the Netherlands and the local people. So it becomes a showcase to give some more encouragement to this far right-wing party.
Mr. Lochocki right now is joining us from Berlin. Mr. Lochocki, from the German perspective, what do you make of this election? Of course, German election is coming up in a few months. Does this really going to set a precedence for your election as well?
I strongly doubt it. To be very fair, I do think that the international press is exaggerating about the Dutch election. I mean, as we just heard, given the two experts from the Netherlands, it's very likely that Mark Rutte is going to form the next election, and Mr. Wilders will remain at the edge of Dutch politics. So for German foreign policy, very little is going to change. And in addition, talking about domestic politics, both in Germany and in France, so far we have not seen any contagion effect across European elections, which means if a far-right candidate succeeds in the Netherlands, will this have very limited impact on France or German politics? As we see currently, Macron is polling very well in France, and the far right in Germany is dipping in the polls over the last 3-4 months.
I do want to invite your opinion also, Mr. Lochocki, about whether the brand name far right is really going to be beneficial for some of these far right candidates. I mean, after all, some does not see a advantage linking their names to so-called black swan phenomenon, or even to President Donald Trump of the United States.
Right, you're right about it. I do think that linking yourself to Donald Trump is a very two-edged coin. It's a very ambivalent, at least in Germany and Austria, and as far as I'm concerned in France, it's not really helping to be associated with someone in the Anglophone sphere which is pursuing politics which are rather dubious, especially in the French and German context, where you have a hint of anti-Americanism. It's extremely dangerous to affiliate yourself with a candidate of either American party. So we see in Germany and in France likewise that the far-right leaders do very little to team up with Donald Trump. They rather avoid being too closely seen or perceived with Donald Trump.
Whether linked or not with Donald Trump, Mr. van der Broek, what about some of the policies, for example, about the attitude toward the Quran and also the Islamic religion and also toward the immigrants? Even if Mr. Wilders will not become, and his party becomes a majority, what would his rise mean for politicians who are likely to form a coalition, eventually government?
Well, certainly the PVV is campaigning very strongly on this issue of immigration and the fear of radical Islam. It rose in the polls very highly during the 2015 refugee crisis, as similar parties like the German Alternative für Deutschland and Front National in France. So the rise of these parties is strongly linked to the migration issue, and that's what they're campaigning on. But Wilders is at this moment so his support is very much depends on how salient this issue is at a certain moment in time, and he is at this moment not looking at a major victory or a large increase of his support. He did quite poorly compared to a previous election in the last elections.
I see.
This was after he had supported the government, and right now he stands to gain compared to the last elections, but it's not going to be a major victory. But certainly there's a group of people in the Netherlands who want more firm migration policies, and they are likely to vote for him on the basis of this particular issue.
Mr. Cui, you've been doing European studies for a long time, so help us to understand now. With election politics very much featured by opinions on immigrants, how will the elections in the European countries being shaped up, and also what would that mean for these countries within the European Union? Does the European Union have a danger, as we suspected earlier, being divided on policies about immigration?
Yes, I think it will be a big question, not only for the Netherlands, its election, and also all of the member states of the European Union. Recent days, European Commission proposed a white paper to give a space of debates for member states, how the scenarios of the European integration. I think now it shows certainly the immigration or refugee issue now give a very, very big pressure on this future of integration, because so far it's the first time we can find so many divergences, so many different attitudes among the member states. So I think that this immigration or refugee issues will give a test case for European integration in future. And also, of course, now we have to have two eyes together. One of them, we have to look at what will happen in European Union institutions, especially how could they do something to calm down this, feelings or this from these member states. And the other eye, we have to look at this so many elections happening in those co-member states of the European Union.
Mr. Lochocki, of course, the elections will lead to policies. Policy is likely to be linked to the specific country's relations with the European Union. With the rise of far right to certain extent in some of the European countries, do you think countries like core countries of the European Union is likely to take a very different step from, or should I say, away their original ideology?
This is very unlikely. I mean, if you speak about the core European countries, which they are, of course, the founding members consisting of the Benelux countries, Italy, Germany, and France, you might see something of that sort lurking in Italy. However, the major northern European countries, France and Germany, are very likely to be governed by pro-European forces in the coming years. It would be a miracle if Marine Le Pen would win the election in France. Her polls don't look very promising. She's most likely going to lose out against Macron, who is a very fierce and adamant pro-European. And in Germany, you might say it doesn't really matter if the center-left or the center-right wins the election. Both will spearhead very pro-European coalitions, meaning that the most powerful countries of the European Union will remain committed to the European project.